My beginning. My name is Emily Brooks, and if you ran into me on the street, you might not think twice. I'm 32 years old, with dark brown hair, usually pulled up in a messy bun, a habit I picked up after years of chasing after my little girl, Lily. We've lived in Maple Grove, a modest, close-knit town tucked amongst Oregon's evergreens, since Lily was a baby. People around here know whose truck breaks down every winter and who grows the sweetest tomatoes in spring. Some might call it ordinary, small-town life, but for me, it's always held a gentle kind of hope. I never set out to be a single mom. I met Jacob Turner in college when we were both dreaming big, our futures unfolding ahead of us like highways stretching toward the horizon. He was charismatic, funny, ambitious, and, I'll admit, the center of any room he walked into. We set our vows on a rainy spring afternoon, sure that together we could weather anything. But life, as I would learn, can pull you along paths you never saw coming. Our differences widened over the years, and despite our best intentions, our marriage unraveled quietly, the way a thread slips loose from an old sweater. After our divorce, I found comfort in the routines of motherhood. Lily was my reason to get up each morning. The first giggle I heard, the last goodnight kiss I gave before crawling into bed exhausted. She has Jacob's eyes and my stubborn chin, a combination that gets her out of trouble as often as it gets her into it. Being her mom isn't always easy, but it is always worth it. Every scraped knee, every art project taped to our refrigerator, every impromptu dance party in the living room, those moments became my anchor. Money's never come easy for us, and the family I was born into is a couple of states away in Nevada. I juggle 2 jobs most weeks, mornings as a barista at Maple Grove Cafe, and evenings cleaning rooms at the local inn. Lily knows not to ask for things she can't have, but she also knows how fiercely she is loved. Our lives are built on trust, laughter, and the little traditions we make together, like Friday night pancakes and summer picnics by the river. Sometimes I worry that I don't have enough to offer her, that she needs more than bedtime stories and backyard adventures. But when I see her curled up in my lap, lost in a picture book, or running through the dew-soaked grass in the morning, I remember why I chose this life. I wanted Lily to grow up knowing she was safe, surrounded by kindness, and taught to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Those early years were simple, marked by the quiet resilience of 2 girls against the world. I didn't know then that our greatest test was waiting just around the corner. All I knew was that I would do everything in my power to protect my daughter, no matter where life's winding road might take us. The pain of losing my child. It's impossible to describe what it feels like to lose your child, not through death, but through the silent cruelty of the courtroom. I wish I could say I never saw it coming, but a part of me sensed that a storm was brewing. The moment Jacob's family stepped in after our divorce was finalized. The Turners had always carried themselves with an air of privilege. Martha Turner, Jacob's mother, made it clear from the start that she believed Lily belonged with them. I was just a waitress and a maid in their eyes, a girl from nowhere with nothing to offer but love. But isn't that enough? At first, it started with small gestures, unannounced visits, expensive gifts left for Lily, snide comments about my job and our little apartment above the bakery. It escalated quickly. One morning, I found a letter from an attorney waiting in my mailbox. My hands shook as I opened it, reading the formal, chilling words. A petition to change the custody agreement. It was as if the ground shifted under my feet. The lawsuit arrived like a thunderclap, casting shadows over every part of my life. Jacob's family didn't hold back. They hired what seemed like an army of high-priced lawyers, each one slicker and colder than the last. They pulled every string, old connections, favors owed from years in business, even bringing in character witnesses who hardly knew me, but painted me as irresponsible or unfit. There were days I couldn't breathe from the pressure, and nights I barely slept, haunted by the possibility of losing Lily. Through it all, my daughter knew little of the specifics. I tried to shield her, kept her routine steady, her world small and safe. But I saw the concern cloud her wide brown eyes. "Are you okay, Mommy?" she would whisper at bedtime. I lied and told her everything would be fine. Inside, though, I was unraveling. The day of the court decision is frozen in my memory. The judge's words echoed in the sterile, wood-paneled courtroom. Custody would be granted to the Turners. I stood there, numb, as the gavel came down. Martha looked triumphant, Jacob a mix of guilt and relief. Me? I felt like I'd failed the one person who needed me most. I'll never forget Lily's tears as she was led away, clutching her stuffed rabbit, turning back for one last helpless look. Time seemed to stop. My arms ached to hold her, to reassure her that nothing could come between us. But the law had spoken, cold and final. In the days that followed, my grief was raw and endless. I moved through the motions of work, of living, feeling emptier with each passing day. The brightness in our small apartment faded, without Lily's laughter echoing through the rooms. Neighbors and friends tried to comfort me, but their words barely touched the emptiness where my daughter used to be. If love alone could have changed anything, Lily would never have been taken from me. That pain, that powerlessness, became a fire inside me, one I wouldn't let die, no matter how hopeless things seemed. The shock of losing the case, the day of the custody hearing, felt more like the end of something than a new chapter. If I close my eyes, I can still see every detail. The rain streaking down the courthouse windows, the clack of my heels on polished linoleum, the hollow, anxious ache in my stomach. There's a particular kind of silence that hangs in the air before a verdict, as if the world itself is holding its breath. I remember wishing, so fiercely it hurt, that time would stop right there, that maybe, just maybe, the universe would step in and spare me from what was coming. I'd been running on hope and caffeine for weeks, barely sleeping, living off the anxious energy that springs from desperation. Every conversation with my lawyer blurred together, all legalese and cautious optimism, like she was afraid to promise me anything. "We have a strong case, Emily," she would say. "Family courts favor mothers, especially when children are young." I wanted to believe her. I clung to every shred of reassurance, the way a drowning person clings to driftwood. But I could never quite shake the dread that tugged at me, especially once the Turners ramped up their campaign. Sitting in that courtroom, I felt like an imposter at a show staged for other people's benefit. The Turners, always impeccably dressed, sat in their row, looking as if they owned the entire building. Jacob wore a new suit. There was still a softness behind his eyes, but it was swallowed up by the stiffness of duty, the burden of expectations from his family. His mother, Martha, sat beside him, all diamonds and icy composure. She never met my gaze, but her posture spoke volumes. She'd already decided she was leaving with my daughter. The actual proceedings are a blur. Questions about my finances, my work hours, my living conditions. It felt so invasive, as if every day I'd spent struggling to provide for Lily was being weaponized against me. The Turner's attorney, a shark in an expensive tie, paced the courtroom with the confidence of someone who'd spent decades dismantling families. He emphasized how, in their stable, loving environment, Lily would have access to better schools, extracurriculars, and opportunities her mother simply couldn't provide. When my turn came, I faltered. My voice shook as I tried to explain what Lily meant to me, how I'd built a life for us out of next to nothing. I wanted the judge to see not just the numbers on my pay stubs, but the hours spent holding my daughter through fevers and nightmares. The way she lit up when we made pancakes on Fridays, her laughter echoing through our tiny apartment. But in that sterile courtroom, love felt small compared to legal briefs and bank statements. I watched them parade character witnesses, old neighbors of the Turners, family friends, even Lily's kindergarten teacher, who, under pressure, described the Turners' estate as an environment every child would dream of. It was humiliating. I gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, and reminded myself to breathe. The whole proceeding was less about Lily as a person and more about who had the power and means to shape her future. I felt stripped bare, my love on trial, and found wanting. The hours crawled by. I tried to meet Lily's eyes across the room. She sat between a social worker and her grandmother, swinging her feet, looking small and lost. My heart broke a little more every moment I couldn't reach her. I wanted nothing more than to gather her in my arms, to promise her none of this would change the bond between us. But I couldn't even move from my chair. When the judge finally returned with the decision, the world fell away. I remember his voice as distant, almost muffled, a set of words marching toward me in slow motion. In the best interest of the child, guardianship will be transferred. The gavel fell. Martha Turner drew a triumphant breath. Jacob lowered his gaze, and just like that, my world shattered. I stood up, legs shaking, and watched as Lily was taken by the hand, her beloved stuffed rabbit clutched tightly to her chest. Her eyes brimmed with confusion and tears. She glanced back at me with a look I'll carry forever, a plea for comfort, for reassurance, for things to return to the way they were. I managed a wavering smile and mouthed, "I love you," as she disappeared out the door. The minutes after the verdict were filled with well-meaning words I barely heard. My lawyer patted my shoulder and murmured that we could appeal. "It's not over, Emily," she said, but it felt over. I gathered my things with shaking hands, humiliated and hollowed out. My body moved without thought, going through the motions of politeness to people I could scarcely face. Court clerks, the Turner's lawyer, even Jacob, who tried to catch my eye before letting his mother lead him away. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the world was still gray. I stood, frozen on the courthouse steps, and tried to process what had happened. There's a unique kind of pain in losing custody, not like a sudden wound, but a slow unspooling of everything you thought you knew about love and justice. Every sidewalk, every storefront we'd passed together on lazy Saturday mornings, every glimmering puddle from the storm, became a reminder I was going home alone. The next few days passed in a daze. I returned to our apartment over the bakery, half expecting Lily to run up and tackle me with her usual hugs. The refrigerator still held her crayon drawings, and in the bathroom, her toothbrush stood beside mine. Waiting, each night I folded her favorite pajamas, unable to place them anywhere but the spot on her pillow where her head should be. Sleep was nearly impossible. Every sound in the dark could have been her voice. Every dream ended with her reaching for me and slipping away. People tried to help. My friends, my neighbors, even some regulars at the cafe who knew enough to offer soft words and a free coffee. Their kindness only reminded me of what I'd lost. I replayed the courtroom in my mind, wondering if I should have fought harder, spoken differently, cried less or more. Guilt gnawed at me. If I had worked a third job, if I had lived somewhere fancier, if I had hidden my struggles better, would things have been different? One night, sleepless and shivering, I found myself staring out the living room window at the wet street below, headlights streaking past. I realized then that the true shock was how quickly the system could dismantle the life you'd built, how little weight your love held once money and influence were involved. I felt raw and exposed, consumed by a helpless rage. For hours, days, really, I sank into grief, afraid of who I might become without Lily there to anchor me. Yet amid the numbness, a stubborn ember refused to die out. I thought of Lily, her courage and resilience, the way she'd always believed in the two of us against the world. I refused to let that be the end of our story. Yes, the shock of losing the case nearly broke me, left me hollow and doubting, but it also kindled a quiet, relentless determination. If the Turners thought this verdict would silence me or make me disappear, they hadn't really been paying attention all these years. There in that dim, silent apartment, with my daughter's absence ringing in my ears, I took my first, halting breaths of resolve. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. Our story still had chapters left to write, chapters where love, grit, and truth just might have their say. And as the early dawn light spilled through my window, I promised that I would find a way to bring Lily home. Friends who never give up, if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that grief rarely travels alone. In the first raw weeks after the custody loss, sorrow was my shadow, guilt my companion. But loneliness, real, biting loneliness, was the sharpest pain of all. When you lose the thing you have spent every waking moment protecting, you begin to wonder if you've lost yourself too. There were days I barely managed to pull myself out of bed, my bones heavy with regret and fear. Maple Grove, usually so warm and familiar, suddenly felt like a town full of closed doors and whispered sympathy. But then, something happened that changed everything. My old friends came back into my life, solid as ever, like beacons cutting through the fog of my despair. Jessica, Natalie, and Kim had been my world once, the kind of college friends who feel more like sisters than anything tied by blood. We'd laughed together through sleepless exam weeks, stood by one another after heartbreaks, and made midnight promises over greasy pizza that we'd always have each other's backs. Over time, life happened. Careers, moves, marriages, kids. But the bond never vanished, only thinned with the distance that comes from growing up. Jessica was the first to call, her voice bubbling with the familiar warmth that had pulled me out of my shell so many times before. I was surprised she even knew what had happened. But news travels quickly in small towns, especially bad news. I tried to act strong, telling her I was managing, but Jessica saw right through it. "Em, you don't have to go through this alone. Let us be there for you." There was no room for protest. She and the others were coming for the weekend. They arrived early on a misty Saturday morning, arms full of homemade casseroles, fresh muffins, and flowers from Natalie's garden. The air in my apartment changed instantly. Gone was the suffocating stillness, replaced by laughter and the cheerful clang of coffee mugs. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own home. We talked for hours, at first about safe things, old memories, work gossip, funny stories about our very different lives. Kim had been living in Portland, working as a graphic designer and raising twin boys with her wife, Melanie. Natalie, a kindergarten teacher with a stubborn heart and a therapist's soul, shared anecdotes about her classroom chaos. Jessica, ever the pragmatic lawyer, split her time between family court and pro bono work for a children's charity. Together, they wove a cocoon of warmth around me. Yet eventually, the conversation circled, as it was always destined to, back to Lily. Tears slipped down my cheeks before I realized I was crying, and these women, my family by choice, sat quietly with me, letting the pain have its voice. Natalie squeezed my hand. Kim fetched tissues. Jessica simply waited for me to draw breath. It wasn't long before Jessica started asking legal questions, not in a clinical, detached way, but as a friend who was invested in fighting for my happiness. As she listened, her brow furrowed in concern and determination. "Emily, did your lawyer request a full social services evaluation? Was there any chance to challenge the character evidence?" She didn't say it out loud, but I saw the spark in her eyes. She believed the fight wasn't over. The others joined in, each in their own way. Kim, whose superpower was organization, broke out her laptop and started making lists, resources to call, advocacy groups to contact, questions I should ask if there was an appeal. Natalie, convinced that the truth of my love for Lily could win hearts, suggested documenting every moment, every tradition, everything Lily and I had shared since her birth. "We need to remind them Lily isn't a prize. She's your daughter." That evening, Natalie insisted we leave the apartment, even if just for a walk through Maple Grove's familiar streets. At first, I resisted, embarrassed by what people might think, ashamed of the whispers I imagined trailing behind us. But with my 3 friends beside me, the world seemed a little less cruel. We strolled by the park where Lily and I liked to picnic in the summers. We passed the bakery where I worked mornings, the windows fogged from early baking, but always inviting. At each landmark, my friends listened as I recounted memories. Every story, every laugh, and every heartache was a thread in the fabric of my small-town life. As time passed, the weekends with my friends became routine. They took turns staying with me, helping with meals, cleaning up the clutter I'd neglected, arguing fiercely with anyone who would listen about injustice in the custody system. They were relentless, convinced that Martha Turner's influence wasn't as impenetrable as I believed. Their faith in me, faith that, at that low point of my life, I couldn't muster for myself, became my lifeline. One afternoon, Kim suggested we begin gathering evidence. Anything that might cast doubt on the glowing image the Turners had painted of their perfect home. "People like Martha Turner always have skeletons," Jessica chimed in. She wasn't wrong. The Turners had old money, old connections, and, as it turned out, a few secrets they'd spent years sweeping under their Persian rugs. At first, it felt strange. Me, just a cafe, waitress turned mother, embarking on a quest for justice. Yet my friends took everything seriously. Kim researched investigative journalists and local activists who had gone up against powerful families. Natalie scoured forums and parent groups for leads about the Turners, whispers about how they'd treated staff, whether the opportunities promised to Lily were real and not just for show. Jessica reached out quietly to former colleagues across state lines, probing for anything the Turner family's legal team might have missed or tried to hide. I grew stronger every week, inch by inch. Some nights, curled up in quiet conversation with Natalie or trading late-night texts with Kim, I would almost forget the ache of Lily's absence. Jessica taught me how to request court transcripts and public records. Natalie helped me keep a journal, adding photos and Lily's drawings to document our family's truth. We created binders, one for legal paperwork, one for daily log entries, one for evidence of the love and normalcy in Lily's life with me. It wasn't just the tangible help that mattered. My friends reminded me who I was before all this heartache. They challenged me to smile, coaxed me into laughter, insisted I join a yoga class with them on Zoom, or helped me rebuild my resume. Little by little, their unwavering hope chipped away at the heaviness in my chest. One golden October afternoon, as we gathered on my rickety old porch, Kim looked at me and said simply, "You are not alone, Emily." And because of them, I finally believed it. We became a team, a formidable one. Kim's background in design meant she put together a compelling presentation that chronicled my journey as a mother to Lily. She used photos, text messages, notes from school, and even testimonials from neighbors who'd seen me trudge through snow to pick Lily up from daycare. No matter how tired I was, Jessica dove deep into the legal aspects, strategizing how to introduce new evidence, drafting affidavits, and setting up meetings with nonprofit legal aid organizations. Natalie, with her experience as an educator, connected us to child psychologists and counselors who could speak to the emotional trauma my daughter might be experiencing away from her primary source of comfort. Eventually, word about my case began to spread. Natalie's friend, who worked as a local reporter, sat down with me for tea and listened as I shared my story. Not sensationalized, just raw and honest. She published a piece in the Sunday paper about small-town custody battles, and within days, messages of support began pouring in. Women I'd served coffee to, soccer coaches from Lily's old team, and young moms juggling 2 jobs themselves all reached out, offering words of encouragement and, sometimes, critical information. A retired court clerk, for example, emailed Jessica to share valuable background about Martha Turner's previous legal dealings. Tips like these became threads we carefully pulled, searching for patterns and cracks in the Turner family's armor. All the while, my friends held me together through setbacks and frustration. When an old classmate posted something cruel about unfit mothers on social media, Jessica helped me respond with dignity. When I was denied visitation with Lily for my birthday, Natalie sat up with me all night, reminding me of every birthday I'd celebrated with my daughter and helping me write Lily a letter to tuck inside her favorite book for the next time we saw each other. There were moments I faltered. Sometimes I'd wake before dawn, paralyzed by fear, sure we'd never have another chance. But every time, my friends circled in, Kim with jokes and bright nail polish, Natalie with gentle reminders to breathe, Jessica with the hard facts and new possibilities. Their belief in justice, in me, in the mother-daughter bond the Turners could never buy or break, rekindled my own. As winter descended that year, our work took on urgency. Jessica filed new petitions with supporting evidence, laying out inconsistencies in the Turners' narrative. Kim presented our Emily and Lily scrapbook at a meeting with a social worker, who took the time to really listen. Natalie's school contacts quietly vouched for my character, emphasizing the genuine love, not the wealth, behind Lily's happiest memories. The 4 of us became an unlikely Justice League. We sacrificed weekends and sleep, swapped childcare duties, pooled funds for printing and legal fees, and cheered one another through each small win. When setbacks inevitably came, and they did, my friends never wavered. They'd shown up for me even when I'd given up hope, willing me back to the surface, again and again. Through it all, I discovered something profound, that the Turner family's power wasn't as absolute as I had feared. My friends' belief in me had become armor, I never knew I needed. With each step, each new piece of evidence, each late-night brainstorm and laugh-till-we-cry session, I realized that together, our grit was more unyielding than any money could buy. And so, as the coldest winter winds howled outside, we pressed on, fueled by love, truth, and a sisterhood that refused, ever, to give up. My friends had become the reason I found the strength to stand and fight again. Because of them, I finally believed we had a chance, not just to win in court, but to reclaim the joy, the justice, and the family both Lily and I deserved. Exposing the truth behind the Turner family. If finding the strength to fight again was the first miracle, then gathering the courage to face the Turner secrets was the second. We'd long suspected that behind the Turner family's dazzling reputation, behind their polished charitable galas and carefully engineered appearances, there lurked a darker reality. Still, launching a campaign to investigate them felt like trespassing in forbidden territory. A David and Goliath story, played out not with stones, but with whispered questions, old records, and the trembling hope that truth might prevail. We didn't have the resources of a private detective agency, but in some ways, that worked to our advantage. What we had was a team, my friends and me, armed with laptops, determination, and the collective wisdom of years working multiple jobs, solving real-life problems, and learning never to take no for an answer. Our first step was to map out every lead, tip, and half-remembered story about the Turners, their businesses, and their household staff. Kim sketched out a mind map on her living room wall, blue sticky notes in pink threads, forming a web that would have made any true crime podcaster proud. Natalie sifted through local news archives, searching for any mention of a Turner misstep or a public complaint buried under glossy press releases. She found subtle clues in town meeting minutes, letters to the editor, and comments sections, echoes of old disputes about the Turners' expansion of their estate, complaints about labor practices at their construction subsidiary, rumors that an employee had been quietly paid off after a workplace accident. Jessica, ever the lawyer, combed through public court records, property filings, and business licenses. She was meticulous, keeping her tone steady and professional, even when her findings made her furious on my behalf. Her discovery of a sealed lawsuit between the Turners and a former nanny sent us down a rabbit hole of speculation. We didn't have access to what was inside that file, but a sympathetic clerk, whose daughter I'd once helped tutor for high school finals, tipped us off that it was resolved with a hefty private settlement. Kim, meanwhile, took advantage of her skills in design and digital research. She built a timeline of Turner family charitable donations, cross-referenced with local political efforts that directly benefited their real estate ventures. They engineered their public image like a brand launch, she remarked. Eyes narrowed over her laptop. People who work this hard to curate perfection always have something they want to hide. The more we dug, the more inconsistencies surfaced. Lily had mentioned, almost in passing, that Martha sometimes left her alone with strangers, a breach of court order that mandated only approved caretakers could be with my daughter. I recorded everything Lily confided to me during short, supervised visits, documenting each violation with time, date, and context. Our most significant breakthrough came surprisingly from a woman named Alice, who'd been a housekeeper at the Turner estate for years. Natalie's network in the local parent community connected us after Alice heard about my story from a friend at her church. She invited the four of us for coffee, her hands shaking as she recounted her time working for the Turners. She described a household run by intimidation and perfectionism, where mistakes were punished harshly and staff turnover was high. She remembered Martha yelling at Lily for the smallest things, spilling juice on antique furniture, leaving toys in the hallway, and once even threatening to withhold visits with me if Lily couldn't behave. Alice hadn't stepped forward before because she feared legal retribution. Martha had made her sign a stiff, non-disclosure agreement as a condition of her severance. Jessica explained that while Alice needed to be careful, there are ways to present evidence or testimony to the court, in camera or via affidavit, especially if it related to the welfare of a child. After a few days of deliberation and reassurance, Alice agreed to write a detailed letter describing what she had witnessed. Seeing that black and white truth, typed shakily on battered stationery, gave me the first true hope I'd felt in months. Our search broadened from there. Kim tracked down other former employees, gardeners, drivers, 2 former nannies. Most were reluctant to speak, but a few agreed to make confidential statements about emotionally cold treatment and pressure to falsify records for social workers' inspections. One ex-nanny provided cell phone footage. Taken for her own protection, she confided, of Martha Turner berating staff in earshot of Lily and another child. The audio was harsh, Martha's voice raised in fury, the children's voices small and frightened in the background. In parallel, we found proof that the opportunities promised by the Turners, private ballet lessons, elite summer camps, therapy sessions, were, in truth, more for show than for Lily's benefit. Receipts showed that Lily rarely attended the activities Martha bragged about in court. Instead, Martha shipped her off to relatives for long weekends, leaving her with little structure or affection. We documented everything in organized binders, photographs, receipts, texts, and statements from supportive teachers and neighbors who noticed Lily's withdrawn demeanor and anxiously bitten fingertips. The evidence was compelling, but what mattered most was telling the story in a way the court, and, perhaps more importantly, the community, could hear. Jessica walked me through each piece, crafting an affidavit that read less like an accusation and more like a plea for truth and justice for Lily. Natalie wrote a character reference that made me cry, recalling the warmth, stability, and joy she'd seen between my daughter and me. Kim organized the files as if preparing for a major product launch, designing charts and graphs that showed Lily's decline in well-being since leaving our home. The community's response made a difference, too. After the newspaper story about our fight appeared, women from all walks of life, fast food workers, PTA moms, the librarian who'd quietly let us keep overdue books 1 extra week, sent messages in support. Some shared their own stories of losing custody battles against wealthier exes. Others offered fresh tips, like a neighbor who recalled seeing a Turner family car parked outside a known after-hours club the night Lily was supposed to be home asleep. By the time Jessica filed the motion to revisit the original custody arrangement, our stack of evidence was thick and convincing. For the first time, the Turners could not control the narrative from behind closed doors. When the court scheduled an evidentiary hearing, word spread quickly. Most of Maple Grove had believed the Turner myth, but suddenly, people started seeing cracks. On the day we submitted our findings, I felt a kind of fear and relief I'd never known before. We handed over affidavits, transcripts of concerned teachers' conversations, Alice's letter, and the damning nanny video. It was risky. Martha Turner's attorneys had their own contingency plans, I was sure, but I believed in the strength of our case, in the resilience of the truth. Instead of hiding, I stood in court with my friends behind me, confident that this time, Lily's story would not be overshadowed by money or intimidation. For so long, I'd felt powerless against the Turners, believing their resources would always outweigh my efforts. But with each truth brought into the light, I realized the power of persistence and the courage that comes from knowing you're standing on the side of what's right. We still had hurdles ahead. The Turners, predictably, fought back with every legal tactic they could muster: attempts to suppress evidence, threats of counter lawsuits, and the ever-present glare of their publicist. But the community began to rally behind us. Letters of support flooded the clerk's office, and local leaders privately voiced their concern about how the first hearing had been handled. It was never about revenge. It was about protection, about honesty, about giving my daughter the loving, stable, genuinely happy life she deserved. Our story was now in full view, and the truth, uncomfortable as it was for some, could no longer be hidden behind the polished gates of the Turner estate. And as my friends and I sat together, exhausted but unwavering, I realized the Turner family's power was finally being challenged by something far greater: a mother's love, a web of loyal friendship, and the undeniable strength of the truth. The second court battle, the second time I walked into that courthouse, it wasn't just my heart I was carrying. It was the collective hope and hard work of everyone who had rallied around me. There was a stark difference in my spirit. The vulnerability I'd worn like a badge in the first trial was still there, but now it was layered with something tougher: resolve. This time, I wasn't just some solitary, desperate mother up against the odds. I was the figurehead of a movement, backed by friends who refused to let me fall, by a growing network of townspeople who believed my fight was their own, and above all, by the truths we had uncovered, painstakingly and bravely. The days leading up to the hearing were a blur of late-night strategy sessions and anxious, biting anticipation. Jessica, my dear friend, and now my attorney, reviewed every document, every affidavit, until her eyes were red and her voice hoarse. Natalie and Kim pored over the personal evidence, Lily's drawings, her schoolwork, testimonials from neighbors and teachers who remembered a joyful, thriving child. I spent hours cataloging text messages, photographs, and emails, making sure every scrap of evidence that could illustrate my relationship with Lily would be ready for the judge to see. We rehearsed every possible scenario. Jessica grilled me with practice questions. How would you respond if asked about your income? What if the Turners' legal team tries to undermine Alice's credibility? Are you ready to talk about moments when you struggled without shame? Her approach was tough, but laced with empathy, a shield and a comfort woven together in her words. Nerves haunted me. I paced my cramped living room at night, replaying old arguments and anticipating fresh attacks. But then, Kim would come over with homemade cookies, or Natalie would leave a calming playlist on my phone, and I'd remember I was not alone. Even Lily, in her brief, supervised visits, seemed to sense the stirring change. She drew me a picture, a stick-figured mother and daughter holding hands under a wide blue sky. "That's you and me," she whispered. Together again. I tucked it into my purse the morning of the hearing. The courtroom was just as imposing as before, but this time I noticed the difference in the way people looked at me. No longer was I pitied or dismissed. Now, there was respect, curiosity, even encouragement. Friends from town sat quietly in the rows behind the counsel tables. The local reporter who had written my story was scribbling notes near the back. I could see the subtle nods and smiles from neighbors, fellow mothers, even a few local business owners who'd supported our fight. Their presence steadied me. When the bailiff called the room to order, Martha Turner's legal team entered with their usual display of crisp suits and quiet arrogance. Martha herself wore her confidence like armor, but her eyes darted anxiously, perhaps, for the first time, aware that her side was not guaranteed victory. Opening arguments began. Jessica stood, calm and commanding, her words measured but fierce. "Your Honor, we come before you not only with evidence, but with the truth, the story of a mother and child whose bond has been unlawfully and unjustly severed." The judge, a different one this time, younger and reputed for fairness, listened intently. The Turner side presented first. They painted their usual image: stability, wealth, opportunity. Martha testified about ballet lessons, horseback riding, and exclusive schools, all the privileges they gave Lily. Jacob's testimony was less polished. He admitted regret at how the situation had escalated, but insisted he wanted what was best for Lily. Their lawyer attacked my character, but the words felt less sharp, as if the narrative was finally shifting. Their incredulous tone about my 2 jobs was met with raised eyebrows from townspeople in the gallery who understood exactly what it meant to work hard for a child. Then came our turn. Jessica began with the new evidence: documented violations of court orders, the affidavits from former staff, Alice's heartfelt letter. The court paused more than once to review audio and video evidence, those chilling moments when Martha berated household staff in the presence of children. The judge requested clarification on the non-disclosure agreements, scrutinizing the circumstances under which the staff had been silenced. For the first time, the court saw beyond the facade the Turners had maintained. When I took the stand, my heart hammered in my chest, but I felt my friend's silent support behind me. Jessica's questions were gentle but precise. I spoke of my life with Lily, the small, everyday rituals, the bedtime stories, her favorite pancakes, how she'd fall asleep nestled on my chest. I described the changes I'd seen in her since the last hearing: the anxiety, the nail-biting, the growing reluctance to leave after visits. For each claim, I offered proof: journal entries, photographs, messages from her teachers. I was honest about my struggles: financial insecurity, exhaustion, moments when I doubted myself. But I refused to accept the suggestion that lack of money meant lack of love. The judge asked questions of his own. He pressed for details on the Turner estate's household routines: the way Lily was disciplined, the frequency of her supposed extracurricular activities. When confronted with evidence that activities were far less frequent and often more performative than nurturing, the Turners grew defensive. Martha tried to minimize the staff turnover. Her story wavered when Jessica presented a timeline showing a stream of employees who had left within short periods, several under abrupt or secretive circumstances. The testimony of Alice proved pivotal. Unable to appear in person due to legal threats, she joined via a confidential affidavit and a recorded statement, her voice trembling as she recounted Lily's tears and Martha's rigid, often cruel expectations. "That little girl just wanted to be loved for being herself," Alice said. "She was always happiest when her mother was near." The effect in the courtroom was palpable, a collective tension, as if everyone was holding their breath, finally letting the truth soak in. Our final piece was a binder Kim had designed, a day-by-day account of Lily's life before and after the separation, filled with drawings, report cards, photos, and letters from neighbors, teachers, and parents who had witnessed our bond. Natalie had included input from a child psychologist who, after reviewing Lily's case history, outlined the emotional toll of abrupt separations and the importance of attachment to a primary caregiver. The judge studied the material at length. Cross-examination was brutal. The Turner lawyer tried to paint me as vindictive, suggesting our evidence was a coordinated smear campaign. But each time he grew aggressive, Jessica deflected smoothly, reminding the court that facts and first-hand accounts couldn't be bought or staged. When questioned about my flaws, my low income, my modest apartment, even my anxiety, I answered simply, "I am not perfect, but I love my daughter. No court can change that." As the trial stretched across several days, the momentum began to shift. Reporters picked up on the case, and each evening, Maple Grove buzzed with new conversations. Strangers thanked me for standing up to injustice, and parents confided their own fears about fighting wealthy exes in a biased system. Some former employees of the Turners, initially cautious, reached out anonymously, adding further statements to our evidence. Jessica filed motions to admit these late, and the judge, committed to hearing every voice, allowed most of them. Each detail, each corroborating testimony, added weight to our side. The pressure was immense. There were moments when I broke down, sobbing in the privacy of my bedroom, overwhelmed by fear that it would all fall apart again. But my friends would always rally. Jessica, with legal updates and a reassuring squeeze of my hand. Kim, with a steaming mug of tea and a playlist of sturdy, hopeful songs. Natalie reminding me that Lily needed me to keep my heart open, no matter how bleak things seemed. I never saw Lily inside the courthouse. She'd been spared from testifying. But her presence was everywhere. In the crayon drawings carefully tucked inside my bag, in the little tokens the townsfolk passed to me. A knitted scarf, a good luck charm, notes of hope from other kids at her school. And in the quiet moments when I closed my eyes and swore that I wouldn't stop fighting until she was home. As closing arguments loomed, I stood taller, buoyed by the network that had formed around me. Jessica's summation was eloquent. Money cannot replace security, nor can privilege substitute for genuine love. At the heart of this case is a child whose best interests must come from the foundation of connection, constancy, and care. The judge thanked both sides and adjourned, promising a careful decision in the coming weeks. The waiting was torture, all the more so for how much was now at stake. But unlike last time, I did not feel alone in my anxiety. Friends rotated shifts, staying with me, keeping my mind busy with card games, walks through the changing leaves, and gentle distractions. The community rallied even more. Meals arrived at my door. Small businesses left hopeful notes on my doorstep. Natalie organized a letter-writing campaign to the judge from townsfolk supporting my case, ensuring that even outside the courtroom, our voices would be heard. Jacob, who had seemed resigned in the past, called me one night, struggling for words. "Whatever happens," he said, "I shouldn't have let it go this far. Lily, she deserves the truth." It wasn't an apology, but it felt like a crack in the Turner armor nonetheless. When the day of the verdict finally arrived, the air itself seemed taut, strung with hope and fear. I walked into the courthouse, trembling but resolute, the living embodiment of my love for Lily and the tenacity of everyone who refused to give up. My friends, the neighbors, the whole town seemed to breathe in unison as the judge entered, papers in hand. I didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time since losing Lily, I sensed something new rising in my chest, a quiet, steady certainty that win or lose, I had fought with everything I had, upheld by friends who showed me what true, unbreakable support really meant. No matter the outcome, we had already rewritten the story of what one mother's courage and a loving community's faith could accomplish. Justice restored. The morning of the verdict, I woke before the sun even had a chance to touch Maple Grove's rooftops. My apartment was quiet, the kind of hush that makes your ears ring, and the whole town seemed to be holding its breath alongside me. I sat at my tiny kitchen table, hands wrapped tightly around a mug of lukewarm coffee I could barely taste, rereading the closing arguments Jessica and I had prepared. The pages were scuffed and tear-stained, corners dog-eared from anxious flipping, but I kept them with me nonetheless. A talisman, a reminder of just how far we'd come. Outside, the trees still wore their patchwork of autumn colors, and the air smelled of earth and rain. I pulled on Lily's favorite yellow scarf, worn and trailing a bit at the ends, because it felt like a promise. Today, the world might finally be set right. I forced myself to eat a piece of toast, though each bite turned to sawdust in my mouth. By the time I reached the courthouse steps, a small crowd had gathered. Neighbors, friends, a few unfamiliar faces who had read about our fight in the local paper. The old nervousness surged in me, threatening to sweep me back to the days when I had stood here, alone, small, certain all the power belonged to someone else. But then I caught sight of Kim's bright smile as she waved me over, and Natalie's quick, warm embrace, and Jessica standing tall near the entrance, her briefcase in one hand, a steaming cup of coffee for me in the other. Together, we walked inside, hearts pounding in sync. As we waited for the judge to enter, I scanned the room. Jacob sat a few rows in front, shoulders hunched, hands fidgeting restlessly. Martha Turner occupied her usual place, dignified and rigid, flanked by lawyers, but I noticed a difference in her face, a new wariness. Her facade seemed thinner, almost transparent in places, and for the first time, she didn't meet my eyes with icy confidence. The judge entered, papers in hand. With a gentle but commanding nod, he asked us to rise. My knees nearly buckled. I squeezed Jessica's hand, feeling the reassuring pulse of determination running from her palm to mine. The judge spoke with steady calm, his words deliberate and careful. This court recognizes the gravity of any decision involving the welfare of a child. In reviewing the evidence from both past and present hearings, it is clear that circumstances have changed and that the truth demands consideration beyond material comfort. He went on to summarize the findings: the pattern of emotional coldness, the staff turnover at the Turner estate, the affidavits recounting incidents of intimidation and neglect. He praised the diligence with which my friends and I had assembled evidence, the thoroughness of the documentation, and our efforts to show Lily's real lived experience, not just the trappings of privilege, but the heart of her childhood. When he mentioned Alice by name, I saw a ripple pass through the crowd. He commended her bravery in coming forward, noting that the welfare of the child must always outweigh the interests of secrecy or reputation. I caught my breath, my mind racing. Was this really happening? Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, packed into a few moments, the judge looked straight at me. This court finds that reunification with her mother is in Lily's best interest, he said. Order is granted to transfer legal and physical custody of Lily Brooks to Emily Brooks, effective immediately. Supervised visitation for the paternal family is established pending completion of a review by Child Services. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell. The room seemed to explode, not in noise, but in a torrent of emotion. My legs gave way, and I dropped down onto the bench, sobbing, hugging my friends as they rushed to my side. In that crushing, beautiful instant, every sleepless night, Every wrenching goodbye at the end of a visit. Every humiliating question about my worth as a mother. It all faded behind a single, blinding truth. Justice had been restored. The rest of the day spun by in a blur. A rush of hugs, tears, and laughter. Jessica called it the happiest exhaustion she'd ever known. Kim insisted on capturing a photo. All of us crowded together on the courthouse steps, faces streaked with tears, hands linked in victory. The photo later took up a prized place on my refrigerator, proof to myself and to Lily, whenever she doubted, that hope is worth fighting for. News spread like wildfire. It wasn't just my friends and neighbors. The entire community reached out. I came home to flowers on my stoop, casseroles left on the stairs, and hand-drawn cards from children at Lily's old school. One note, scribbled on blue construction paper, read simply, "Welcome home, Lily. We missed you. Love, your town." But beyond the outpouring of support, there was the wait, the interminable restless hours before Lily could come home for good. Paperwork had to be filed, logistics arranged through child services, and, yes, there were tears for the Turners too, grieving the version of family they had tried to build with money and control. Then, finally, came the moment I'd been aching for. It was a chilly evening, the kind where the sun slips away early, and the world is painted in gold and dusky lavender. I opened the door to our apartment and found Lily on the landing, clutching her beloved rabbit, her social worker waiting quietly behind her. For a split second, we both froze, me, overwhelmed by love and longing, and her, eyes wide and uncertain. Then she flew into my arms. I held her so tightly, I thought I might never let her go. Her hair smelled of vanilla shampoo and sweet relief. Tears streamed down my cheeks and dampened the top of her head. She whispered, "I missed you, Mommy," every single night. We laughed and cried and laughed again. That first dinner felt like a homecoming and a Thanksgiving all rolled into one. Lily asked for pancakes, as always, so I made a dinner of breakfast food, just the way she liked. She gobbled down 2, then asked if we could do Friday movie night right then and there. Of course, I said yes. The couch was piled with every blanket we owned. We watched a cartoon. Lily curled up beside me, halfway asleep before the story ended. In the days that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. There were challenges, yes, old routines, broken and rebuilt. Lily needing more hugs, more nighttime reassurances, sometimes waking from bad dreams. But each morning, she greeted the day with more confidence. Her laughter filled the apartment, wild and honest, banishing the hollow echoes that used to haunt me. The community's support was steady and real. Neighbors stopped by with gifts. Teachers reached out to smooth Lily's transition back to her old school. And her friends took her in as if she'd never left. People who'd once been silent or skeptical now welcomed us, sometimes stopping me to share stories of their own struggles, tales of custody, single parenting, or simply being underestimated. Jacob and I had to find new footing too. For the first time in years, our conversations were honest and hopeful, sometimes guarded, but always circling back to Lily's well-being. He apologized, truly this time, for going along with Martha's strategy, for not fighting harder for what was right instead of what was expected. There was a gentleness in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. As for the Turners, time softened them in a way nothing else could. Martha, faced with court-ordered therapy in a community that no longer looked the other way, gradually accepted her new boundaries. At first, her supervised visits were brittle and awkward, but something in Lily's quiet forgiveness seemed to chip away at Martha's icy pride. By January, Martha sent me a short note. "I'm sorry for all the pain. She is lucky to have you." It was only a sentence, but it felt like a shift, a step toward healing, however small. One Saturday, we joined Kim, Natalie, and Jessica for brunch. The girls were giddy, running circles in the frost-damp yard, while my friends and I sat nursing endless cups of coffee. We talked about the past year, the heartbreak, the victories, the sleepless nights, and glimmers of hope. We talked about the power of sisterhood, of not giving up, and of ordinary people standing up to injustice. Jessica raised her mug in a toast, her eyes bright, to justice and the family no money could buy. We all clinked our cups, laughing. As the seasons turned, I caught myself marveling at the lasting changes. Lily's happiness was a daily litmus test. Her energy, her affection, her bursts of creativity. She grew bolder, more herself. We learned to plant roots, to trust our community, and to build new dreams. Friday night pancakes multiplied into Saturday morning hikes and lazy Sundays, with books scavenged from the little free library downtown. On weekends, we volunteered at the local shelter, baking muffins and sweeping floors side by side. Giving back seemed the only way to thank the town that had wrapped us in its arms. The legal fight gave way to the work of true restoration, believing that we deserved joy, that our story could be a beginning, not an end. I shared our journey at school PTA meetings, at local coffee gatherings, even in the newspaper, hoping that other mothers, other families, might find courage for their own battles. Justice, I realized, wasn't about winning in court. It was about reclaiming our lives, together, and choosing each day to build on love rather than fear or anger. It was in the way Lily's hand slipped trustingly into mine as we walked to school. It was in Saturday night laughter, in the resilience she showed when memories were still hard, and in the community that whispered, "You're not alone. There is no perfect ending." Life has a way of throwing new challenges, testing the foundations rebuilt with such care. But I know now, deep in my bones, that justice is real, not because someone declared it so, but because love, truth, and relentless hope made it possible. And every time Lily looks at me, safe, home, her future bright, I remember that sometimes justice isn't just restored. Sometimes justice comes home.